if you've got direct questions about processes, equipment, skills, or careers in dyeing and printing and preparing fabrics, then please pop them in the chat.
So I went to uni and I actually did something very different to dyeing, which was I did hand embroidery at the Royal School of Needlework. So that was kind of where my interest in like costume and heritage crafts and things like dyeing sort of really took off. So I did my degree there, and whilst I was there, I always had quite an interest in sort of coming into London, going to the theatre. And actually, just after I graduated, I went to one of the TheatreCraft events in 2015, which was great. And I met a lady called Pauline, who is the head of costume at Glyndebourne Opera House. So that's where I first sort of started doing internships in that theatre and opera. So I did one there, and then a year after that, they sort of passed me on to the Opera House, and then I did a week's internship at the Opera House in the dye department. And then after that, I just kind of kept, sort of sending emails to theatres, getting dyed, sort of sending little emails to the dye departments and be like, do you need anyone to come help? So I did a sort of period of doing that. And then in 2000 and the end of 2016, I did a breakdown course at Pinewood Studios, which is like a week's course of like dyeing, breakdown, all the things that we do. And then after that, I slowly started getting into film work. So I then started working on I did a Marvel film as a trainee and sort of worked my way up until I was a sort of senior dyer on like Bridgerton, Queen Charlotte, Lady Jane, and sort of things like that. And then just after doing that, I then had always been doing casual work at the Opera House and still doing casual work in a theatre. And they sort of gave me a call, and I ended up at the Royal Opera House again. And then, I was a casual there for quite some time. And then a place came up, and that's when I decided to become a full-time member of the Opera House, which has been, it's been lovely. And I've only just stopped getting lost in the warren of passages and workrooms that we mentioned before. And I've been there 2 years. So now I'm going to just sort of say what our normal days like in the dye department. So as you said before, it's at the top of the building, so we've got a lovely amount of natural light, which we obviously need for all the dyeing that we do. So in a normal day, we've obviously got our set shows, which will be done by new designers. So we'll go through the entire process from looking at the costume designs with the designers, establishing colour palettes, any sort of characters that have like a sense of a large plot line to them. So say they get punched, they've got, like in Feston, we've got a guy that had a nosebleed. So we need to establish where is he going to have this nosebleed? Where is it going to go? What's the type of sort of look we want to have with it? Is it a small nosebleed? Is it a big one? So we'll do that whole process with the designer. So some of the team will be on doing breakdown. Some of us will be dyeing, putting samples together on different fabrics, so the designer can just really have an amazingly personalized experience with their costumes from start to finish. And in the background of that, we also have our revival shows. So at the moment, it'll be something that's on our stage soon, like Romeo and Juliet, which is quite a massive and beautifully dyed ballet. So we'll be having costumes from that that'll come back, that maybe the dancer that's dancing that role now needs, has got different shoulders. Maybe they need a little bit taken in, maybe they need it taken out. So we'll be dyeing sort of inserts, fixing any little bits and bobs where it's been in storage, and just working on that at the same time as doing another show. And then we'll be doing that for things like a ballet stock room as well, which is where we've obviously got our roster of dancers that are based at the Royal Opera and Ballet all the time. So we have all of their skin tones sort of on, it's called like our Bible. So we have all of their specific skin tones. So when they're dancing in roles where they'll need a leotard that's completely matched to their skin tone, they'll come up and tell us that, and then we'll go through our little Bible and we'll match all of the new fabrics that they need in that skin tone to that. So that's something that we do just day to day. And then obviously we'll have little bits of surprise, random jobs that come in that just sort of make the department quite a fun department to work in. There's some days when I do sit there and I am like, this is my job, just throwing bits of red paint and blood at some shirts lined up inside a shower. So in general terms of things that I would think that are good for working within the dye department and breakdown department as well, obviously, is I think anyone that has a good understanding of colour, me specifically, I didn't obviously come in from a costume course, so it's not something, obviously doing costume is wonderful beforehand, but anything that, you know, fine art, anything that where you have a good idea of colour, how it interacts with each other, how to mix colour is brilliant, and just someone that's keen to learn and has a passion for the role as well, I think, because obviously with an interest in something, you don't always have to do a course in that specific thing or have, you know, higher education in that thing. It can be from any different role. I'd say that you can go into it, and if you really want to learn sort of the art of dyeing and breakdown, it is something you can sort of learn and pursue. So understanding of colour, I think you have to have a good eye for detail. A lot of some of the stuff that we do involves, some of our ballets are quite old, so they have sort of beautiful hand painting and screen printing and things like that on. So it's obviously having an eye for detail, enjoying tiny little delicate things as much as you enjoy doing something big that has to be seen right over the orchestra pit. Like some designers like to have elements of details where it's not always going to be seen right at the back of the auditorium, but now obviously in the sort of age of filming things in HD and things where a lot of the sort of film type ethos of really highly detailed work is meeting theatre as well, it's always good to have an interest and a patience for that, really. Another good thing I'd say to have is to be a problem solver. As working in a costume department, you know, anything, we plan as much as we can, but sometimes there are things that you have to think on your feet, especially with revival pieces. Some of our costumes are, you know, 70 years old, and you might expect it to do one thing and it does not want to do that. So I think you have to just have a sort of a sense of a calmness when something does maybe not go the way you want it to completely. You can look at the situation and go, okay, how am I going to make it do that? Is always good to have. And yeah, and I think that just generally leads into a general sense of adaptability, and just also really enjoying the role, I'd say, is something that's important, because one amazing thing about the dye department is there's never a day that is the same. And yeah, I think that's one of the things that I really enjoy about it. Obviously I could go more in depth into sort of different techniques that we do, like screen printing, the dyeing itself and the breaking down, but I thought maybe at this point, if anyone's got any particular interest in the sort of facets of the dye department, I could answer some questions on those sort of topics rather than just reel all of them off at you, and you're like, it's a lot of information.
Yeah, that's great. So if you have any specific questions for Pearl, please pop them in the chat. There's some brilliant videos, aren't there, on YouTube, Pearl, of some of the processes that dyers go through, and we can pop the links to those in the chat at the end of the call as well. So from BB, for a breakdown like Scarpia's costume in Tosca, do you dye the shirt red or use blood sacks?
So on that specific shirt, I'm just like delving into my memory then. Usually we'll have, with him, I think it was a blood sack on stage. If it's something where it's a character that is wounded and they will be coming on again, we'll obviously have a shirt where they are stabbed in it or whatever happens to them. And then there'll be another shirt that is sort of the bloody shirt, and that'll be produced upstairs. With bloodstains, we usually don't. We do some patch dyeing, maybe to, if it was a white shirt, we'd do some patch dyeing on it beforehand if it was more of a dried stain, because you've got, with dyeing and patch dyeing, you've got a little less control over where it goes sometimes, because obviously the bleeding out of dyeing it. So with a blood stain like that, that would be in a specific place where someone had been shot or wounded, we usually do that with a medium called Dynaflow. So it's permanent and you have to heat set it in, but we'd usually do that with either sort of spraying it on with an airbrush or sort of applying it on with like paintbrushes or sprays, just depending really on what sort of level of bloody the designer wanted and how they generally wanted it to look. Some people obviously want something to look more realistic, whereas some people are a bit more stylized and they want more of a sort of Hammer House of Horror energy to it. But
Fantastic. Then we've got so we're going to save sort of career bits for a bit, and let's talk about the dyeing first of all. So what brand of dyes do you use?
So at the Opera House, we use a few different dyes, but I'd say the general fail-safe, it just recently changed its name. It used to be Dylon, but now it's Dye Pro. But when anything comes up, obviously we get a lot of fabrics which are like 100% silk, then we'd use Chemtex silk dyes on those. But anything that sometimes is a pre-made costume or pre-made sort of, we get a lot of shirts sometimes which are, they say they're 100% cotton, so you'd be like, oh yeah, I'm going to use a cotton dye, but sometimes cottons do have like a mix in them. So I'd always say if dyeing, I'd just generally stick to using a dye pro first. And we in our dye department, we have, if you've seen pictures of it, which are in some of the videos as well, we have these sort of carts out all the time, like a Lazy Susan type thing on the top with all of our mixed up dye pro colours, our sort of primary colours that we'll use day to day, that we can just sort of all dip in and out of. So that's our kind of bread and butter of the dye department, if you will.
Is there a big skill in like do you need to be skilled in mixing colours to get into a career like this, or is it something you learn?
I think it's something you learn in I think it's also that general phrasing of having an eye for colour, whatever that sort of is in a sense. But when I came into dyeing, I completely sort of apprenticed within the Opera House, in the sense of, obviously I knew how to mix colour from my background of being in the arts and things, but it wasn't to the point of which you do when you're dyeing, because all of our dyes that we have, say the Dye Pro for example, will have, you know, a couple of different reds, and each one of those reds will be a blue red and the other one will be a yellow red, and you'll sort of have that saved in the top of your memory for when you're dyeing something. Say it's like a pillar box red, you're like, oh, I'd go in with a blue red for that, and knowing which colours work well together, which colours will make something not as well, we call it like a muggy colour. So when a colour goes into more of a sort of dusky tone, or it can look a bit dirty, it's sometimes you'll use like a colours that clash with one another on the sort of colour wheel. And I think that kind of knowledge, it's all a lot of trial and error, and it's all a lot of just learning, practicing, being on the job and learning it as well, in a sort of apprentice or trainee type situation. The more you do something, the more you kind of build up a memory. When I first started training, I used to keep like a journal where I'd sampled all the different dye pro colours, just so I'd always have like a good working knowledge of what every specific colour looked like. And then as I was given little things to dye, with that knowledge, I just sort of build it up, and each time get a little bit faster, get a little bit more confident, until you're just at a point where you can just actually relax into it and just enjoy doing it for the love of doing it, rather when you start learning something at first, you can be a bit nervous, which is fine.
Yeah. And so can you practice at home, do you think, using
I would say in a dye sense, just because of the slightly toxic nature of some dyes and things. And if you have a space to do it, that you can safely do it, brilliant, and you have some little dye pros. But anything with, I used to practice a lot with gouache paints. So just getting you can go to Casa and get like a color wheel. And if you get some gouache paints, they're clean colors like Dylons and things are. And if you just sort of get into practicing and sort of taking a fabric or a color that you like and going, I'm going to mix that and try and match it as best you can. It's something like that that then help you for when you would go into a professional environment. You'd obviously then start dyeing and using these colors. So you'd be able to then build up that kind of phone book of dyes that you can go, oh, that color looks like this color that I used to practice mixing with and things like that. With the dye colors themselves, it's just kind of getting a memory of what they all look like, and the color mixing itself can be sort of practiced with anything. Right. But gouache is a good start.
Fantastic, thank you. And in terms of like printing techniques, what particularly, you use a range of techniques, don't you, in the department?
Yes, so we do a lot of, we have a digital printer, which is obviously a lot more sort of Photoshop and CAD based. And we use traditional screen printing as well. So we have our screens outside made, and then we'll obviously do the printing in the opera house. So those can be effects such as like foiling, where we'll use a metallic, we'll print an adhesive and then we'll put heat press on. I'm like acting it out.
I like it, yeah.
Put a metallic foil on and then we'll heat press the foil on, and obviously these foils come in like bronze and silvers and all the colours of the rainbow. We've got flocking, which is when you use a sort of the fluffy sort of, we'll use an adhesive and then heat press the flocking onto it so we can flock fabrics, and then we can oh my god, I forgot the name then. Devore. I was like, we can devore fabrics as well, which is where you print a devore adhesive on it. You get it a lot on velvets, and then it'll make the velvet go bald in like patterned places. So we do a lot of screen printing, and that can be used in breakdown techniques as well. So we get screens that are developed for the designers that want like a specific artwork that they've got or they've developed themselves. But we also sort of have in our room like a library of screens that we've got from old shows, or just things that we have sort of like a textured sort of worn down leather looking screen that you can print on something to give like a piece a little bit of movement, or sort of splatters, good ones as well. So all those things will build up when doing a piece of breakdown on something.
Right. Oh, that's so sorry, I'm just looking at the questions here. So thinking about, you've talked about your career route in so first of all, are there internships or work experience placement for a department like yours? There are, aren't they?
Yes, so we have the apprenticeship at the moment, and we do take people from our course in Purfleet as well. But I would always say, I think we do still have places available for people that sort of email in their CVs as well. So I'd say it's always good to contact and obviously meet things like, because I was lucky when I went to TheatreCraft. That's a good place to meet someone who's actually in the department that you want to work with. So I'd always say something like that, or just contacting careers is always a good idea. I did that with a lot of theatres, and I think the Nationals still do plays. I think all the big theatres do in London. It's just sort of emailing and prodding.
Yeah, they do. And we've got a work experience page, and you can fill out a form. The National Theatre have a similar process that we sort of get back in touch with you. So do sign up for all those kind of things. And I would say, that there are on the horizon, there are traineeships. There is an apprenticeship pathway that is a long time coming, but it will get there. So that will be a level 3 dyeing and it's a dye technician pathway, it's called. So yeah, so that's in development. So we hope within the next year that might be available. So maybe watch this space, that this time next year we'll be able to offer that. But there are lots of routes in through, kind of like you said, that you did embroidery background, and then there's sort of art foundation and textiles courses.
And I know they do a lot of courses, and they do some sort of open days and things at Pinewood Studios. They're called Creative Media Skills. I found them to be quite helpful. Places like Cosprop, I think, are doing a lot of, because they've got a dye department as well. They're doing a lot of talks and things at the moment. And I just generally think that sort of looking at where costume talks are and things like that, and seeing what industry professionals are at these events and things is always a good start as well, just to generally meet people in the industry, especially if anyone's looking to go into film or things like that. Going to those types of things is where you meet people in the industry.
Fantastic. I'm just popping a little YouTube video in. It's a little bit old now. It's Parveen breaking down the Don Giovanni dress. Yeah, well, it's not breaking down. She's sort of creating a dripped effect, an ink effect. So that gives you a little insight, because you get to see inside the dye room there. So does the Opera House seek help from casual dye / costume technicians, and what's that process like?
We do. At the moment, we've got a sort of roster of people. So that it used to be with casuals. I think it was, if you sort of was an intern or things like that, you'd start casual work. But nowadays, it's advertised on the careers page at the Opera House. So you'll apply for a casual position as you'd apply for sort of any job, and then there'll be an interviewing process, and then a selection of people will be chosen to sort of go on the casual roster. But I'm not sure when that happens each time, but it does get refreshed at points, because obviously people change or move away or start working there and don't leave.
And there are sort of there's sort of busy periods where we do need casual staff, isn't there, across this, when there's a huge ballet to do or things like that.
I was like, oh yeah.
So there's a permanent staff, and then there's a casual staff brought on when we have particularly busy times. There's another question coming here. I've done the internship. Any other questions, please put them in the chat. I looked at the vacancies website and was wondering, what does trainee mean? Does it mean someone with experience or someone who's being taught the skill? If the position is trainee, then that means that you're being taught the skill. But I think really it would be that you come with a portfolio, at least an interest, not from big, not from a base of no knowledge. Would that be right, Pam?
I think obviously have some sort of, I think more of a passion and a general want to do it is the most important thing, because obviously with something, especially in a dyeing type sense of knowledge, not everyone has the facilities to just go and practice doing dyeing. But obviously I would say if you're applying for a trainee role, obviously try and do a portfolio with some examples in, even if it's doing some breakdown samples yourself and trying to get a bit of a thing. I think anyone that would see that in a position interview would be still charmed that you've tried to do something and you're showing an interest in it. And then the training's more or less given on the job, really. And I think a sense and want to be there is the most important thing, and a passion for what you're doing, I think, is what's really everyone's looking for on a trainee role. And then you get the training.
Fantastic. Any other questions for Pearl about any of the processes, about dyeing, about costume in general, that we might be able to answer this afternoon? Nothing coming through as yet. What is your favorite part of your job? That's a good one.
Oh, I think I like the changeability of the sense of you never know what you're gonna get when you walk in the morning. You don't know what it's gonna be assigned to you, in the sense of, you know, we did Cinderella last year, which is a beautiful ballet. So one day I was like ombre in the top of the fairy godmother's costume, and then the next thing we were getting ready to have Trovatore on stage again, and we were doing sort of lacerated scratches on massive leotards. So it's more sort of, you get a really a wide sense of lots of different things to do in a day, which is always nice, because I'm one of those people that's quite high energy and likes to be sort of pinging around.
That was muted. So you're working across multiple pieces?
Yes.
Yeah,
at the moment we've just finished doing Feston, and then we've got which was quite a big show. In sense of costume designers very sort of has a very aesthetic sense of color and breakdown. So that's something that's always wonderful to work with, is just someone that knows what they want, because then you're like, I can give it to you. Hopefully.
I'm muted again. Can you tell us more about breaking from Artemis? Can you tell us more about breaking down a costume to make it look old? So what sort of processes did you go through to do that?
So that would depend on something. So you've got from a scale of very light breakdown to really trashed. So if something's lightly broken down, where, you know, someone's worn it, they're not necessarily, you know, peasant end of the scale. But so a light breaking down is just simple things such as sanding the cuffs, any sort of sense of wear when you wear clothes yourself, like where you'd get normal bobbling, where you'd get creases in the arm. So we do those we'd usually spray and dampen the costume, and then put a string through the cuffs and sort of tie them so they're like that on the mannequins, and then steam them, weight down the pockets. So that's just sort of creating like just the bare bones of someone simply wearing a piece of costume, rather than it just being off the rail. And then obviously when we're going further down the scale to really sort of trashed things, we had a piece where it was a sort of burnt suit. So then we used mediums such as puff binder, which is it's a print binder, and we were stippling it on at the time, and then you can use a heat gun on it and it'll bubble up and sort of look like melted plastic or sort of ash and charred burns. So then we'll paint and dry brush on top of that to create the sort of shading of the costume and cut down into it and things. And the same with mud. We'll have like special mud mixes which will put sort of small sometimes it can be when I used to work on film, we used to use real mud that you'd put sterilizing alcohol in and PVA, and then stick it to the hem of a costume, because obviously on a close-up you'd see it was real mud then. But in theatre, obviously, because we have a nice big orchestra pit, and also we don't want to cover the stage in soil, we have these small chips that we mix inside our binders with adhesives as well, so we can then create this sort of 3D level of mud, and then we'll shade on top of it. My Google search history is constantly like, what does dried mud look like? What's the colour of the mud in a certain part of England?
Brilliant. Do you go around taking pictures on your phone as well of textures?
Yes. I've got so many just random pictures, or sometimes if I'm on the tube and I'll see someone with like, if someone, you obviously sometimes you get a lot of builders and things coming home on the tube, you'll see someone and you're like, oh, that's such a wonderful broken down, because it's hard when you're doing things like that, because obviously breakdown, if you do your job well, no one's supposed to notice that it's been painted. And especially with things like tradesmen or like Festum, we were doing some kitchen porter shoes that had sort of anything from the kitchen splash on them, and sometimes it's really hard when doing splashes to try and create something that doesn't look sort of like a contrived splat on a shoe, or you know, someone's painter and decorator and has paint on them or hand wipes on them, and you don't want it just to be like sort of just
obviously done.
So yeah, I'm always sort of like, is it weird if I just try and take a picture of his trousers
just surreptitiously?
Yeah, just like, oh, that's a really nice bit of wearing on the knee.
It's a very strange hobby to have.
I know.
And we've got another question specifically about a dye technique. For the seasonal fairies dresses, do you know?
Oh, yeah.
Did you dye them first and then digital print onto them?
Oh, so the seasonal, so we have the seasonal fairies tutus. Those were the ones that had digitally printed flowers on, and some of the seasonal fairies that did the dance when the fairy those were ombre. So
this is Cinderella, is it?
Yeah, Cinderella. Yeah. Sorry, I was like digressing straight into well. So the seasonal fairies, as well as the godmother as well. So those were all ombre. So with the leotards, they were ombre in 2 colours. So they came as white leotards that were just slightly not completely put together yet, and then they were ombre into the 2 colours and blended, and then the subtle skirts after that were then ombre to match the leotards, and then we had the flowers digitally printed, and then they were sewn onto the
so they were like pieces that were sewn on.
And if it was the tutus, they were the flowers were digitally printed beforehand, and then the fabric was sewn onto the tutu.
Right, amazing. Loads of processes that go into it.
Cinderella was beautiful to work on. There were lots and lots of different sort of interlinked and layered processes. So you'd sort of wave goodbye to something, and then it'd come back and be like, oh wow, now more.
Yeah, excellent. So a lot of what you do is sort of sampling and trying out and
yeah, so I think that's another nice thing to be able to do, especially when a designer comes in for a new show. If they've got a certain vision of something, obviously we have certain techniques of how to do things that's your normal sort of go-to, but breakdown and dyeing as a sort of art is, you know, there's always new products being made, there's always new things being made. So it's nice in the sampling period that we're given that ability to sort of play with different techniques. We've just one of my colleagues at the moment, we just had the opening of Festum. We had a dress in that was supposed to it's bloodstained, but it's also supposed to look wet as well, which is very hard to create something to be dry and look wet all the time. But my colleague managed to sample using silicone to coat the dress in. So that's something that was sort of a bit of sort of playtime for her. So it was nice to be able to put my head in and look at what she was like, oh. So, you know, because usually on other fabrics, because this was a drapey fabric, it needed something light on that'd still have movement, whereas in other things we'd usually use like a gloss acrylic binder on something that was a bit more sturdy, but we didn't want this dress to be completely crispy.
No one wants to dance in a crispy dress. Yeah. Fantastic. So we've got another of Artemis about where would you recommend someone who wants to go into costume making gain professional experience? So this is specific about costume making. So sorry if it's been answered. So there's all sorts of ways you can gain experience. Professional experience is kind of a nice to have. Obviously there's work experience, you know, so we have, you know, so you can apply to any of the theatres that offer work experience, like us, the National, the Royal Shakespeare Company, and various other like opera and ballet festivals and companies that all have that make their costumes. But also there are costume makers, so you can Google those kind of things and ask for work experience with them. And I would also just recommend trying stuff yourself, like building your own portfolio at home. And there's a lot to be said for like just trying techniques. And Pearl, would you sort of say, I know your job is very specific. There aren't many specific dye shops in theatres necessarily, are there?
No, I'd say there's if people were wanting to go into dyeing specifically, there's also there is a lot of work available on film as well, which is, I would say, if when sort of trying to go into film, when I was quite lucky when I went into film, I met someone at a costume talk. So I think it's one of those things again of any sort of talk, I know that the creative media people do a lot at Pinewood when sometimes they do like a taste of costume day where they'll have some industry professionals in to do like kind of a bit like this but in person. So just go into things like that and constantly networking, I think, is the surest way to sort of try and go in. And as you said, just doing a lot for yourself as well and getting to the best of your ability and your abilities that you have without going into professional training. If you get a portfolio together, I think people are always impressed by someone with a willingness to really sort of go the mile, than, you know, someone looking at something and being like, oh, that's, you know, not as good as if they had an amazing professional studio. It's not about how something looks, it's about sort of your interest in it and sort of you wanting to go into it, really.
Right, fantastic. You might have seen it in the chat, a little way up the chat. I have put a link to a YouTube video, so please have a look at that if you haven't copied and pasted that link out already. We're just about coming to the end of our session. We've just got a few more minutes left. If anyone's got any last minute questions whilst you're deciding whether you want to ask a question, I'm just going to say that yes, we do have apprenticeships available at the Royal Opera House, Royal Ballet and Opera, I should say. They're all level 3 apprenticeships. So we have them in costume making. Unfortunately, our costume making apprenticeship is just closed for this year. So sorry, but we do offer it every year. And it went out a bit early this year, but just coming up, there is a costume performance technician apprenticeship that has just been released this week. So if you want to work live with the artists, on stage, then and looking after the costumes, maintaining the costumes and dressing and doing quick changes and things like that. That's a really interesting other route in costume. So our costume departments, we always have the workrooms that make the costumes and workrooms like the dye room, the wigs room, the hats and jewelry, and we have shoe rooms, but we also have this huge costume performance support department that, you know, obviously keep the shows running and all the costumes on the performers. Someone's just asked if I can post a link again. I absolutely can. How many staff are in your department, Pearl? That's just a last minute question coming.
All right, there's 4 of us full time, and then we'll have an apprentice as well. But when we have a busy, well, I'm like, oh, it's busy. But when we're particularly busy, we can sometimes have like up to 2 casuals joining us as well, or sometimes 3. It's just depending on the workload. But 4 full-time members, an apprentice, and then we'll have casual